Welcome to another episode of Distory. My name is Kirk from Horoscarp, and tonight we are going back into Snow White's scary adventures over in Disneyland. Now, we had finished with the Dwarf's Cottage. We're going to step back into it just for a second and then complete the actual attraction tonight, and then we can move on to newer iterations of the ride. With me, as always, is the well-researched, very funny, always humorous, always has jokes on the fly when you need them, Kate, the Disney Cicerone. Kate, how are we doing this evening? Do you want to tell us a joke?
No, that's like the most incorrect opening you've ever given me. But no, I am doing good. I'm just fresh off of D23 and all the exciting things that came with that. Lots of history, lots of fun. So I'm have all that in my brain. But I have been doing a lot of studying of Snow White, not just the attractions, but also digging really deeply into the history of the movie. So my brain has been in Snow White land for a while, and I found some really interesting pieces of information from these animators that had these interviews that were just kind of like lost to history. So I'm going to integrate that into our podcast episode here as we go. Just to
I'm excited because you said you found a bunch of lost scenes. So anything that's missing that can help complete a story is always fun.
Yeah, man, some of it helps explain what's in this attraction. So I think it'll be a really interesting one. So before we go, we left off last point. You had a little bit of weather happening, so we had to just kind of like end our episode a little abruptly, like the end of this ride does too. So I feel like that's appropriate for this one. But we ended in the cottage at the basically scene one of Snow White's scary adventures. But I have a story for this one that I've discovered since that episode that I feel like we have to talk about. And that is, of course, about the turtle that is on the stairs. So this little turtle, this guy has his own little story. He was inspired by the Silly Symphonies, The Tortoise and the Hare from 1935, and the Toby Tortoise Returns from 1936. And yes, that is where they get the name for Toby Turtle, who's in Robin Hood, in case you've ever wondered the connection there. So that's where Toby's name comes from.
That was two of our audience. So if you're one of the two, I'm very happy that we could help that connection.
There's got to be more than two. But this is what he looked like there in that one. So the tortoise then the turtle, I should say, for Snow White actually has his own little history. So he was animated by Grim Natwick. Animator Grim Natwick grew up in a little town in Wisconsin called Centralia, which has now changed its name and it's called Wisconsin Rapids. So it's a different name now. But he spent his summers swimming in the Wisconsin River, you know, as kids do at the time, which I actually found a picture of it, like a really old photo of the river that he used to swim in. And so they had a paper mill. What?
Yeah, the river.
I did. I'm very thorough in my research.
Oh, my Lord. Oh, you know, I went on his 1910 Snapchat, and luckily I was able to pull a photo where he went, yo, just taking a dip.
So in the summertime, there was a paper mill that was like basically a hydroelectric paper mill that used a dam down the river from him where he would swim. And what they would do is they would clean it out in the summertime. They would actually like undam the river, which would make the water level go down, and then it would expose all of these river rocks that were on the bottom of the river. And the little soft-shell turtles, they would come on out and they would swim over the rocks and they would get up on them and then they would sun themselves on the rocks and absorb all the heat. So he observed those as a kid, you know, as you do. But years later, he remembered those little turtles and he thought to himself, a turtle is an interesting character. So he made a whole bunch of series of sketches based on those little turtles from his childhood. And then one of them was turned into the gag where the turtle crawls up the stairs only to, you know, make it just in time for everybody to run back down. And then he falls down the stairs and kind of slides out the front door. So technically it wasn't his gag. But remember how Kirk told us last time the animators would get paid if they brought a really funny joke essentially to the scene. And so he did get paid $50 for that one because it was a pretty significant gag. But I also read in this part that sometimes they would only get paid $5 to $10 depending on how good it was. So if it was a very significant
good gag,
yeah. So it was, and of course the turtle that was a fantastic one. So that's just a little bit of history of that little turtle who is in this attraction climbing up the stairs after Snow White. So just wanted to give a little. I'm going to call him Toby because I feel like all the turtles are just Toby, but it's a little turtle history.
I found a picture of how he felt when you tracked down where he swims at. So that was...
Yeah, I'm very thorough with my research. Maybe
I'm
too
impressed,
evolved.
dude. You hey, don't commit a crime around Kate. She will find out where you swim, and you're going to be treading water in no time.
I found these great model sheets for Toby Turtle, which was really
so fun.
And then they have then I also found this sign that's like for Grim Natwick that is over in Wisconsin Rapids. So if you're in the Wisconsin Rapids area, you can go find the little historical marker for that animator of Snow White. So then scene 2, we're going to move on out of the cottage and we're going to go to outside the dwarf's cottage, which was actually in the original iteration in 1981 was going to be scene 6 near the end of the ride. So they mixed this all about. And you remember how we talked about that last time, Kirk? I actually watched the Tokyo version and I realized that they used a lot of these ideas from 1981 that they discarded for Disneyland, and they used them in Tokyo Disneyland, which opened the same year. Because they have that like runaway minecart scene. They have that in Tokyo Disneyland.
Yeah, it's like the endless mine or something is what they called it.
The story in the work order notes for this was this: as the guests leave the warmth of the dwarf's cottage, heading for the mine, they once again encounter the evil witch. It says witch here in the notes, but obviously they changed it to the queen and some of her helpers, the raven, the vultures, all those kinds of things. And the set description is scenic backings and painted shapes and flats simulate trees and forest vegetation. Now, we talked about this last episode, but this is the actual work order for Fantasyland from 1981, and it gives us, this is what WED Imagineering would use for creating this attraction. So that's where this is coming from. So the really interesting thing about the scene is like the thing that we go and we see first thing is the evil queen peering into the cottage, which isn't in the movie at all, right?
Right.
This is not actually appropriate for the movie. It doesn't make sense because the witch goes to the cottage, but never does the queen like peer in the window at night in the cottage. So this is something they created just for the attraction.
I would argue that this is never appropriate. Just peer into people. Put up that picture of her, dude. She looks crazy. She's like, what are they doing in there?
She's being a
and I don't know. When I usually look in dwarf windows, I typically bring my staff, my crown, and my big squawking bird. You know, just to be stealthy. I usually do that.
Yeah, she's not really hiding it too much, is she?
No. Fun fact, the witch static figure is model number F-17 and the raven is FA-20.
Yeah, and that's true of all the animatronics that you see in any of the rides. They always are assigned a number. That's true. We saw that in the Jungle Cruise as well. So gives you for maintenance and stuff, maintenance purposes and whatnot as well. So the queen is peering through the window of the cottage and she says, "These dwarves can't hide Snow White from me." And this is all...
It's the greatest line ever.
I mean, yeah. And that's
serious.
She's serious. Then across the way, there is this mural here of a log and some trees that are just kind of painted. And then the really kind of fun one is the mural that you kind of see ahead of you, which is the castle up on the hill in the moonlight. And then it has a sign to the dwarf's mine, which is where you are headed next. Just a little bit ominous there, but I don't have anything else for the scene unless you do, Kirk.
I just want to say, Slay Queen, she looks amazing. I mean, those ruffled cuffs, like, are you kidding me? Stop.
Was it? Yeah, is it like fur lined?
Yeah, it's fur-lined cuffs. She would make Cruella jealous in this scene.
You know, what's always really interesting to me is that Walt Disney hated the color purple. Hated it so much. Yeah, but she definitely, purple is one of her colors, you know, in a lot of things. So it's interesting to me that they ended up using that. And I'm trying to read through this because I found a really interesting interview from one of the ink and paint artists. And they talked about the colors for the dwarves. And she said that she remembered that all the dwarves were more or less like pink And she felt they needed to be darker because they would be out in the woods and eating berries and things. So they needed like darker clothing, I guess. So she thought of more burgundy and mulberry colors. And she actually wanted a purple tunic for Grumpy. But Hazel Sewell, who was the nurse and good friend of Walt Disney, felt that because Walt didn't like purple, she made up an alternative green overlay instead of the purple one. But they liked the purple one anyway because even though Walt didn't like purple, they felt it was a better color for Grumpy because I guess purple equates with Grumpy, which then I guess tracks for the queen, right? That she would be kind of angry.
Right. And we had previously talked about how royal blue or purple were used back in like ancient Greece and ancient Roman times because to dye the fabric, those colors, you would have to smash snails that are really rare. So only royal folks would be dyeing with that color. So most people had either plain clothes or dyed with something that was more accessible in nature, where royalty would be the only ones afforded to get such a exquisite color.
Right. So it makes sense for her to have purple just as a queen. And
she's obsessed also with her beauty. So it makes sense. It all tracks.
And she's grumpy. So
I don't know about that, dude. She looks great. Look at her. She's not mad about anything. What's she mad about?
She's on the outside. Look, she's got serious FOMO.
Yeah.
They're out there. They're like singing their happy songs and dancing, and she's out there. She's stuck outside, waving through a window.
It's me.
Tapping on the glass.
I'm the problem. It's me.
Anyway, after this scene, we're going to move on to scene 3, which is the dwarf's mine. And then it leads into the entrance of the castle by the end.
You can't say it like that, Kate. You have to say, "In a mine."
You can say it that way. Go
fine.
For it.
All right, fine. Here, let's start again. Now we're going to go into
the dwarf's mine.
In a mine, where a million diamonds shine.
Okay, that's fair. So in the original story, in the work order here, it says inside the dwarf's mine, guests experience what seems to be a cave-in. So this is what would have been in previous scene 7. So this is not what we see here. So they changed it before what we're actually going to see. But original was going to be the guests experience what seems to be a cave-in, narrowly escaping teetering timbers, runaway ore cart, and an endless mine shaft tunnel. On their way toward the cliff, they are offered a poison apple by the witch, and all this other stuff happens. So we won't get into that. But that's what this scene was supposed to be, was kind of like a runaway ore cart. Instead, they changed it to more of what we see in the movie, I think, with just kind of highlighting the diamonds in the mine.
I always thought it was a shame because in the audio tracks, we never got moaning wind, explosions, or jewel tinkle. Not twinkle, but tinkle. I don't know what that is.
I think we do have a jewel tinkle. It's like where they're like, you know, like to the tinkle sound of tinkle. I can't say that. That's what I say. Jewel tinkle. Like a bell tinkle.
Like a bell, like a ting 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 ting.
Yeah.
That would be a tinkle?
Yeah. Because a twinkle's like a star.
Okay. A tinkle is a jewel.
It's a sound.
Tinkle
right?
sound.
Like a
tinkles.
Like Tinkerbell.
Okay. Yeah, I mean tinkle. I'm looking up online. It's like a magic wand or a metal wind chime sound would be a tinkle.
Right.
Not the water effect. So, yeah.
So in the 1983 version of this scene, it's more like the 1955 version that we heard with Snow White and Her Adventures. It seems like they were really trying to pay homage to the original and not change it too much. So they sent that new scene that they came up with the runaway ore cart, like, let's go do this in Tokyo, where they won't be so upset that we changed it. Instead, we're going to try to keep it as close to the original as possible and keep the scene similar. But of course, they've added lots more diamonds, lots more lighting, lots more tinkling sound effects.
Well, don't you think it's pretty cool that, like, when you come full circle, and obviously we're in the 80s here, but if you go all the way into New Fantasyland and Walt Disney World, we do get a runaway ore cart of sorts with Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. So I think it's like, again, it's kind of neat because it's non-intentional but it fits and makes sense, and you can carry it over back to this old dark ride.
Yeah, and I love here in this scene, they have these barrels that are full of diamonds in the top, and that reminds me so much of the queue of Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, where you have to spin the barrels.
Yeah, you have to spin them, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, is such a... If you don't know what we're talking about for a second, when you're in Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, there's all these barrels, and they're all in a circle, and there are 7 of them. And you spin the 7... and they all represent the dwarf. I found this out the other day, Kate, which is crazy. If you spin them really fast, you'll get an animation of the dwarf that's really... It's more clear than like the it's almost like a flip book kind of animation on them. But if you spin it really fast, you'll get like a nice clear picture. And if you get all of them, all 7 spinning, then Snow White shows up and she dances in the middle, which is great.
Yeah.
And everybody freaks out in the queue because nobody knows it's a thing. So, like, I always scream at people to spin the barrels, and then when it happens, the whole
intense
crew...
to go on that ride with you. I was not gonna lie.
Yeah. I was with these... I made friends with some Brazilian folks that had just become Americans, and they were celebrating, and I was like, have you ever spun the barrels? They're like, what do you mean? I was like, we gotta spin them. And we got everybody, and as soon as it happened, man, oh, dude.
That's awesome.
It was tinkling in there.
Awesome.
It was awesome.
Back to the mine in this version of the attraction, Snow White Scary Adventures. They do have ore cart full of diamonds. They have the Dig, Dig, Dig song playing. And then they have a couple forced perspective murals of the mine, like we saw in Snow White and Her Adventures. But this one's just a little bit, I guess, better. But it looks like then that you're going to go off into the distance into this mine, but it's all kind of painted on flats, so it's not obviously real. Not dimensional, I should say. So then we kind of go around the corner here, and there's 2 vultures ahead on a branch, which of course just comes directly from the Snow White and Her Adventures, although they have gotten an upgrade for how they look. They're a little bit more like they are in the movie instead of how they used to be. Here, hold that one up. I'll see if I can find the other one real quick, because the way that they used to look was a little bit rougher. They used to look like this. So they got an upgrade.
That's the Temu version of the vultures. But hey, it does the trick, and it only cost me 20%.
So they definitely got an upgrade with the vultures. They turn their heads towards the entrance of the castle, so that's similar to what they did before as well. But the entrance to the castle changed from the 1955 version to the 1983 version, because it's, instead of having like the portcullis that they had, we're now going to have actual like doors to the castle that open up. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves of this ride. Ready? I've been doing a lot of soapboxing this week. I'm sorry.
Boy, here it
I
comes.
know. I need
here
to get.
It comes.
Yeah. So I don't know why it's this way, but there's always the sound effect for the doors opening starts long before the doors ever even start to open. And it seems to only be in this version that I've seen. I think the Paris one is actually timed better. So I don't really know why it's not timed well. And it's been that way forever. And it's still that way in the current version today. It's just you hear the... And so the only thing I can figure is like, is there supposed to be something happening off screen or where we can't see it, where like the chains are rattling and then the door creaks open, but it sounds like it's creaking the whole time. So I was like, why is it creaking when no doors, nothing's moving, nothing's opening?
Kate, hold that up. Can you seriously tell us the reason why it's doing that and stop gatekeeping?
I wish I knew.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. But it's interesting. It's a drawbridge as well, which is that you're going over, which I think some people can't see because it's dark. But there are chains on either side of that before the doors to the castle open. But I love that it's that throwback to that original portcullis like painting that we saw in the 1955 version. Yeah,
that's amazing, and the detailing on it. It's one of the more beautiful things that it could have easily gone away.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Into scene 4. Which is the Queen's Chamber, which I think is one of the coolest parts of this attraction.
The first time I ever experienced this live, I was like, are you kidding me? How do they do this?
Do you want to talk about how they do it? Should we talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
I do have the original model for the scene. She actually looks a little happy in this scene. Like, check her out. She's like,
Yeah.
hey, welcome.
She's like, yo, what's going on, everybody? I got apples.
So, do you want to talk about the queen and the effect a little bit?
Yeah, so I made an assumption because I couldn't find the specifics of it. Is it a Pepper's ghost?
No, it does not.
Oh,
I actually do have it. I guess I'll talk about it a little bit.
Please do, please.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, there is a part of this attraction where the queen is looking into the mirror on the wall, and you only see the backside of her with her arms lifted and the collar on the back of her neck. And then she turns around. She says, magic mirror on the wall. And then she turns around, and then she is suddenly the witch. And she says, with this disguise, I'll fool them all. And it's actually quite effective and quite terrifying. But the way that this is achieved is by two models. So there's one queen and one witch rotating on different sides of the mirror, which is actually a sheet of transparent glass.
Oh, so, okay. Because I was thinking, like, in my head, it would either be... That makes sense with Scrim, but it had to be two rotating things at the same time. But I didn't know if it was a model on that side or if they did it as a mirror or glass to make it look like it was more like eerie or ghosty rather than... That's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's still, the timing has to be perfect. I was thinking that they were almost on a turntable that was controlled by the same gearing. Because then you could never get out of sync because they would have to rotate together. They wouldn't rotate independently. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The only thing that's interesting is you do catch in some angles, you do catch the old hag's or the witch's
thank you.
hair. You do see the witch's white hair kind of peeking out.
You do.
But it's still not bad. You're moving.
It goes by so fast you don't even. Yeah. All you're noticing is because you're looking at the reflection of the queen in the glass. That's what you think you're looking at is the reflection. And so you're not paying attention to that detail of the hair. You know, the interesting thing is, though, reading through some of these old interviews from these animators, you know how she has like this giant collar on her dress and so does Snow White. And I always thought that was like super weird. Like, I know that some part of it's just like the fashion of the era or whatever, but like there's always like these giant collars. And there's actually a reason for that. It has to do with the fact that they had a really hard time like animating their like neck and their head. And so if they just put a collar around it, it eliminated a whole bunch of problems for animation and it made it a lot more simple.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So like the collar is not just necessarily just for wardrobe for stylistic purposes. It actually was just to hide some of their challenges of animation back when they had a hard time animating people, realistic looking people. So yeah,
that
was interesting. Yeah,
that's very interesting.
Yeah. So I have a couple of things for the throne, which we kind of glossed over a little bit, but we got to go back to this throne because this thing is one of the best things ever. This throne is decorated with the statue of a peacock, which is considered one of the most beautiful and vainest of birds. So it makes sense for the evil queen. The expression vain as a peacock comes to mind here. This illustrates the queen's own obsessive vanity. In ancient lore, people also believed that the peacock's flesh didn't decay after death, which led to the peacock being associated with immortality. So it has a couple different meanings. And I was trying to figure out exactly who created this throne, because it's such a fantastic piece of Snow White culture, I guess you could say. And Claude Coates said in an interview that he thinks it was Hugh Hennessy that designed the throne, but didn't know for sure. Because a lot of these people were assigned different scenes and stuff. And, you know, it's definitely part of like the background. It was definitely part of the background. And Claude Coates was the one that did backgrounds for this. So it's hard to say exactly, but I just love the detail on it. So it's just a circle of these, the feathers. And of course, the raven is perching there as well as her little friend. The earlier versions of this didn't have as much visual effects. Like it was a little bit plainer. We see the more vibrant colors that we see on the mirror and whatnot were added in 2010 as part of Disneyland's 55th anniversary. They added some projection mapping on the mirror that actually makes this effect even more spectacular.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And the only other note I have for this voice was by Ginny Tyler, did the voice for this attraction for this character. But
I have a question. how's the lighting for this scene for the mirror? Like, do they shut off the light so that you can't see the reflection, or
it's not a reflection.
You still see? No, I understand that, but like, I mean, like the faux reflection, right? Or when she turns and the other character turns, can you see the back of the witch in the mirror?
I think you just don't see much in the mirror when she turns.
Well, that's what I'm saying is, like, I wonder if they shut off the light so that you can't see through the scrim.
Yeah. It definitely just kind of like disappears, whatever's in the mirror.
Right. That's what I was figuring. Oh, cool. That's so cool.
So the whole scene itself is spectacular, and there's a long lead up into it as well. They definitely use that camera angle, theory of like the long shot, the medium shot, the close up. And so the long shot, when you go in through the dungeon doors, there's a long shot, and you can see the track in front of you, and you're heading towards it. So you're entering into this room with her, but she doesn't turn around until you're in the close up, which actually makes it way more intense. And then she does lean a little bit towards you as well. And it's just like, she's right there.
Yeah. I mean, her dialogue is that monotoned, really scary voice that's ominous. And then as soon as you hit, it's right in front of you.
Yeah. I like the model.
Showing the dialogue.
All right. Do you have anything else for this scene, or should we head on into the dungeon?
I do.
I can't wait. All right. I'm ready.
I want to talk about, this is like history of just, why are old women scary? Because I thought about this. I thought about this for a second, right? Because, like, again, there's nothing like inherently scary about an old woman, right? There isn't. So, but there has to be an origin story of like, why would you make an old hag? Why would you make an old witch? Why is this concept of someone who is an older woman somewhat scary? So here's what I found. Old women villains are especially scary because historically the most powerful person in a child's life was their mother. So children do have a way of kind of splitting their mother figure, though, into two different parts. The evil mother, who always makes rules and regulations, policing your behavior, getting angry at you, and then the benevolent nurturer, the one who is always giving and protects you and makes sure that you survive. So, and then there have always been in either Slavic or Russian folklore, there's a great story that spans even way before the Brothers Grimm wrote Snow White, and it's about Baba Yaga. Have you ever heard of Baba Yaga?
Vaguely, yes.
Okay. So like this is pre the Evil Queen. She had two opposing roles, but was the same person. So she was described by some as repulsive and ferocious looking old woman who fries and eats children, while to others, she is a nice old woman who helps out a hero. So, for example, there's one where a kid goes into the woods to go ask for a candle, and Baba Yaga asks her to do a bunch of little tasks and chores. The kid does all those chores, and then boom, she gets the candle and she brings it back to her home. And then there's another story where the kid doesn't do what they're told, and Baba Yaga eats them. So,
cautionary tales for children.
But like, I think it's very obvious and telling of like trying to get kids to do what you want, more or less. But I found some pictures of Baba Yaga, and I again, these are very old. This is from the 1900s. This one that's more contemporary that I'm going to show in a second shows her hut. Because all of the depictions of Baba Yaga is that she has like a scary, creepy, thatched hutch and that she lives in. But what's weird is that it has chicken legs. Isn't that weird?
I did not expect that.
But if you look at the faces of these Baba Yaga figures, it's very much the old hag or the witch.
Yeah, she's got the hook nose and everything.
Right. It's this very Slavic Russian depiction of a old woman who's scary. So Baba Yaga, Baba means grandmother, like babushka.
Right.
And then Yaga is something that's like taboo in culture. So if something that happens that's like a venomous plant or something that like you shouldn't go near, or even that a cultural taboo could be Yaga. So she was like the taboo grandmother, if you put it in any kind of context. So,
Okay.
What?
Just keep going.
Well, I did find a modern day depiction of it's not Baba Yaga.
Sorry.
I did find a modern day depiction. It's not a Baba Yaga, but it is Lady Yaga. And you don't want to see her poker face.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well,
I'm still not done.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm still not done.
Okay.
I'm still talking old lady. So I also found another interpretation, which was Yama Uba, which is in Japanese culture, and she's a mountain witch who, much like Baba Yaga, lures kids into her hut and eats them. And then she also, though, will help a lost traveler if they need anything. So depending on how you treat her, she can either bring destruction or great fortune and happiness. And I found a picture of what she looks like.
Oh my gosh.
And these things like all
like
predate.
melted.
These are centuries and centuries old, which I think is so crazy to like think that, I don't know, the symbolism of an older woman in the woods is evil. I didn't make it up, dude.
It just makes me sad. But this is why people are so terrified of like elderly people, you know? Like it's just like
because they eat you.
They eat you.
They eat you in a hut.
You're not nice to them. Although, see, but look, Snow White was nice to the witch, and that didn't turn out well for her. So I'm not really sure what the moral of the story is. Just stay away from that. That's easy.
Yeah, but she wasn't really like just like an old woman. Like if she was an old woman, it would have been different. But she was like she was somebody who was posing as an old woman, as a witch. So it's like not the same.
Yeah.
Even though these ones are all witches. And one has apparently a hut with chicken legs.
Chicken hut.
It's a chicken hut, dude.
I mean, it's a convenient way to move your home if you don't like your neighbors. But only if you can control the chicken.
Youngin has to move often. The HOA is like, all right, dude, we're okay with the thatch that you chose and the color that you picked for the shingles, but the chicken legs were a little much.
Wow. All right. Well, that's interesting, though. It is. That is interesting.
Yeah. Because they shouldn't be. Old people are wonderful.
That's right. Indeed. I do have a little note from the animation history of the witch, just a small one. So Grim Natwick was talking about, this was Norman Ferguson, and he was the one that animated part of the witch. And so he said, there was probably not a better animation artist in the world, Russia, Denmark, England, or anywhere else who could have done what he did with it, meaning the witch. He grew up on Broadway, and he had a natural sense of exaggeration. His problem, if he had any, was going too far. So now when I see the witch, I think Broadway star, big flashy jazz hands, because she is so exaggerated in her. She's just like over the top. And I'm like, that's where it comes from, was his roots with Broadway, which I think is really interesting.
His makeup with those etched lines is fantastic.
Yeah. So let's head into scene 5, which is the dungeon. And from the WED notes, it says, the scene becomes more ominous as guests observe the remains of those who have previously fallen into disfavor with the queen/witch. Beyond the dungeon, they see the witch preparing poison apples in her cauldron, attending to the instructions in a ghoulish cookbook. And the set description is set pieces depict stone block dungeon cells, bars on windows, and chains hanging from the walls. Now, remember, in the 1955 version, we did have this, and we actually had, the skeletons would actually talk, right? So we had what, Oswald the skeleton. So now we don't really have that so much. They're more just like the skeletons are actually stationary in this version, but they are hanging all over the place. And we did kind of touch on last time that the skeletons, why are there so...
Kate?
What?
Easy, Kate.
Well, why is the dungeon such a significant part of this attraction when that's not true of the movie, right? And we mentioned, like, this doesn't make any sense as to why this is a significant part. And that is because it was meant to be part of the movie. It was the queen actually proposed to the prince, and then he said, I'm not going to marry you, lady. Get out of here. And so I found some concept art in between the last time we talked about this. This is actually the queen, evil queen, going down into the dungeon. And you can see here some skeletons are like statues leading the way in down into the dungeon. And then there's so much concept art for this. There's this one of the skeletons who are hanging up in there. So this is directly where they pulled this from, because they took all of these from the original movie, and they took these concepts and then they integrated them in the ride. So these are just lost scenes from Snow White that we do get in the attraction. But these are some of the most interesting ones. So this one, she's actually depicted as a queen, and she's behind a big wheel, probably for some sort of torture device. And she's kind of a hooded, cloaked figure, but you do see back in the back, you see Prince Florian chained up next to some guy who looks an awful lot like the one that we have here in the attraction. And then you see this one, I think, is the best one. Okay. So here he's actually blindfolded, attached to a pillar, and the evil queen has her arms crossed and is looking at him like they've had a conversation. And the one below it, just a very, very rough sketch. You can see that this didn't get very far, but you can actually see them chaining him up in the dungeon here as well.
Marry that boy, marry him anyway, marry that boy. She doesn't care, dude.
She's like, no, if I can't have you, no one can. And how many times did she do that, though? Because all these people have fallen into disfavor.
There's a bunch of skeletons in there, dude.
Were they all people that she proposed to that were like, no way, lady? And she's like, well, down to the dungeon you go. Like, I just have questions. I have questions about who all these people are, you know? Was she just mad? Did they, like, you know, not to cut the toast off of her sandwich, like, or the crust off of her sandwich? Like, what happened here? Like, you know, to make her so mad at all these people that they end up with their chained down into the dungeon. Anyway, so that's where all those concepts come from in this particular part of the attraction. Some of it is very specifically from the film, because remember, in the film, there's the skeleton who's reaching for some water that can't quite get there. And it's not quite this way in the movie, I believe. I think it was just like a cup or a pot or something that she kicks out of the way. But in this one, there's actually a little statue, or I guess I don't know, what would you call that? Like a figurine on the wall that is dripping water of, like, a dragon, I guess. Would you call it a dragon, Kirk?
Yeah, I would go with like a dragon or a dog.
A dog, something.
It looks more dragon.
A dog. I don't know. He reminds me of Bowser.
It looks vicious. Whatever it is, it's vicious. Oh, Jesus, dude. Oh, my God. Holy cow. All right.
And it does have real water, I think, coming out of this at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe some sort of demon head, and the skeleton's reaching for it.
Reminds me of like a gargoyle, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the scene setting, they do have these wall torches that look like they're on fire, but they're not. So it'd be like a torch. And then they have these really cool sconces that have these skeleton heads on the top that are glowing with red eyes. What?
Yo, whenever you invite Kate to a dinner party, the first thing that she starts all conversation with, do you want to see some really cool sconces? Do I ever? Hang on, they have a skull on them. Oh, awesome. A lot
of fun at dinner parties. Thank you very much. I am...
Do you go to dinner parties?
No.
I was going to say, dude, I don't think I've ever been to a dinner party. I like how you say, I'm a lot of fun at dinner parties, and then both you and I have never been to a dinner party.
I think I've been to like one in my entire life, so I've thrown a couple, but I've never been to... People don't invite me because I talk about sconces.
Yeah. Don't bring that weird girl. She always talking about...
She talks nonstop about Disney history. I can't stand it. Mm-hmm. I like yours with the lights on. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Anything else in this part before we move on to like the actual witch part of this?
No, this room was torture.
So then we head in around the bend, and this is where we run into the witch with her cauldron. I have a couple of animation notes. I know you've got some stuff for this area too, Kirk, so we'll definitely get to you. The scene we're setting here is there is a big spider web that's over this particular scene, and then the witch is holding a poison apple over a cauldron with flickering flames. So I was reading through the animation notes, and this original scene with the poison apple coming out of the cauldron, looking like a poison apple, was animated by someone named George Rowley. But I was learning about how the technique of how they made it look like the steam was coming out and how the flame was flickering. So what they would do was they used a double exposure technique, and they used what they called a flicker cell. So for the steam and for the fire. So what they would do is they would have 3 cells, all slightly different of flames or whatever, right? And they would keep taking one off and then putting another one on, and it would flicker like fire. So it's actually different cells that they would like pull off and put on and put off, and then that's how they would make the fire look like it's flickering.
So this is a lighting effect, and a cell is basically what's the material for them?
Cellulose. That's where it comes from, cell. Yeah.
There you go.
It used to be something, a highly combustible kind. In the beginning, they would use ones that would spontaneously combust. And then they learned over time they couldn't do that. They said that there was actually, someone had stored a whole bunch of cells in a box with a lid on it. And it actually like disintegrated and created a like noxious gas. So over time, they used ones that were safer, made of cellulose, but it was like the first ones were actually quite volatile to use. But no, so it wasn't even like lighting. It was like if you think of like the multiplane camera and you're putting all the different cells on it. So they would like just layer the cells with different ones. And they would take this one off and put it on, this one off and put it on, and that would create the flickering effect. They also said that the red on the witch's nose in this original movie in this scene was done the same way as the blush on Snow White's cheek, which we learned was real makeup, right? So the ink and paint department actually used real makeup for those things. And then the pots of potion special effects that they used in the movie was done by animator Josh Meader. And he also did the diamonds in the mine. And the bubbles in the washing up scene with the dwarves, he had his wife go out on the balcony of their apartment and like blow bubbles through a little like straw, and he filmed it, and then he used that for all the bubbles in the dwarf scene. So that's not really neither here nor there for this, but I just thought it was interesting since we kind of passed the dwarves already. So
that's a cool movie making technique for a time period that obviously people weren't layering like they did for Snow White. That's why Snow White was so, if it was just an animated full feature talkie cartoon, that's something, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that this was so multi-dimensional, it made it, I think people understood why it took so long once they saw it.
Yeah, because it was incredible.
It was all these crazy techniques that still, I think, would be impressive to a lot of folks. Like, let me implore you, if you have not watched Snow White recently, go back and you'll go, this is a masterpiece. It really is fantastic.
Well, and you remember how I was talking about how they made the water look so realistic on there? I finally found exactly what it was. It's a lacquer that they put on the cells to make it look that way. And they did have to be very careful when they used it because it was so reflective that it didn't, mess up the scene. And they also, I learned for the multiplane camera, the most number of cells they would use is like layers is 6, because anything over 6, you would basically make the layers that are on the bottom look very cloudy because of all the layers of cellulose on top of them. So, but their standard was 4. Usually they used 4 layers. They'd only use 6 in like very, very dramatic scenes. Like when the witch transforms from the queen to the witch, they would have many layers because of all the special effects they needed to do to make that happen.
So cool.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the scene a little bit?
Sure. There's so much going on here. I tried to break down a couple of things, and some things I could find, some things I couldn't. But the overarching, right, is we're looking at the witch behind this spider web, and it looks like she's doing chemistry because there are various vials and beakers. There's mortar and pestle. There's the cauldron. There's some sort of like dragonish figure on the right that's holding up her spell book or her potion. Oh, it's a griffin. Okay.
And he was in the beginning, remember, in that little part where they're going to...
Oh, I never got a good picture of him. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, so it's the exact same one that's was in the queue. Shows up again here. And that's true at Disneyland Paris as well. So you can still see it there.
That makes sense because that's the one that's holding the spell book or the the potion book, I guess you should say, for this. In that one, oh, I love that. And then in the back, I just thought this was neat. Each one of these, when I was a kid, you know, because when you watch any of these scenes of like bubbling liquids, and they would bubble so much that they would go through these glass, conically shaped tubes and curves. I always wondered, like, why on earth that is. Well, it's either scientifically, for like chemistry's sake, it was either to get it to go from steam to recondensate back into a liquid, or it was a heat exchanger. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But I couldn't find like the technical terms for any of this stuff, but that was like the purpose.
I think of like distilling, you know, I think of like distilling.
Yeah, it's this, well, same thing with distilling. Distilling, you're purposely removing water and keeping the body and removing the head and the legs of the spirit. So it's all chemistry, but it's pretty creepy too, which is pretty cool.
I have a quick note here from our friend Jim in my chat. He said, I had to do a walkthrough one night in 1990 with the Fantasyland attractions manager to sweep up some popcorn. She pointed out that the spider web was steel to protect the apple effect, which in a blink and you'll miss it moment contracted from an apple into a red skull.
Yeah, so, which by the way, that is very convincing and very cool looking. Because it's so small, but it's like in her hand. It's so neat looking.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So they said the Imagineering did this to prevent the witch in the boat apple issue in the next scene that plagued the attraction for years, because as I said, it was one of the most expensive effects in Disneyland. So we'll talk about the stolen apple in a minute, but thank you, Jim, for contributing that. That's really
that's awesome. That is very cool. I mean, it looks incredible. And like her hand, it's like a little tiny orange skull almost.
It does. That's really interesting. And it goes by so fast. Like you might have just missed that, you know?
Right. Because you're staring at, you know, it's the apple, but then to see look, this one caught just a little bit of it, but really up close.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Because it is 3D. It's a 3D skull. It's very cool.
Well, and it's interesting, you know, I was reading in one of these animation interviews that they said the movie was so revolutionary at the time when it came out in the 30s because you could go see it multiple times and you would see new things every time you went, right? Which is that level of detail that Disney is known for, really like kicked off not just in the attractions, but in the films back then, you know, that you could go and you'd keep seeing things every time you went. And that is what Imagineering, they carried that over into the parks. And that's why you see here, like, I went on this ride all kinds of times and I'm not sure I've ever even noticed that detail, you know?
Waiters, swimmers, and divers.
Waiters, swimmers, and divers, indeed. So but you had some cauldron talk. You promised me cauldron talk. And is it time? Is it time?
We can, you know? Yes. All right. So obviously, the witch is brewing up this potion so that she can dip the apple into it and poison it and kill Snow White, right? So I always have been curious, again, much like wanting to know why old people are scary. I need to know why cauldrons were associated with witches. It's weird. I have a weird problem. And the only solution is to look up Celtic mythology.
All right. Let's do it.
So in Celtic mythology, the cauldron was a powerful symbol associated with the goddess Cicerone, and she owned a magical cauldron that granted wisdom and inspiration. And the cauldron was seen as a source of transformation and rebirth, a place where ingredients could be combined to create something new. And so there also became this association with afterlife and the idea of regeneration. So, for example, the cauldron in the legend of Dagda, a prominent god in Irish mythology, could provide the endless supply of food and was linked to the cycle of life and death. And then you saw it in periods of medieval alchemy and medicine and herbalism, and many women were the practitioners of herbalism and used cauldrons to brew these special different potions and remedies. And women were often labeled as witches during this time period because they wielded special knowledge or power. But this wasn't seen as like something negative necessarily. I did find just an illustration to go with this.
It's interesting that you said that, like life and death, and that's exactly what she's doing with this poison apple. So that's fascinating in itself.
So I found this Celtic imagery of them like boiling in a pot. Obviously, a great representation of a lady. My goodness.
She's a handsome one.
Dude, you think they had trouble with necks? Look at this guy. This guy's got nothing. I think they had trouble with shoulders, hands, legs, feet.
What just happened to their hand? Like the arm is just like done.
Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot going on. So I mean, obviously, imagery wise, very similar. And she looks like she's brewing with some sort of herbs and whatnot. Now, I want to talk about literary sense because this is really what brought it to the forefront. One of the most famous people in the history of the world, William Shakespeare, in the play Macbeth in 1606, where there were 3 witches shown around a cauldron, chanting incantations and preparing a potion in the line, double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble, which made it extremely iconic. So here's just real quick for Macbeth, little picture of the witches and their cauldron. So this is back in 1606 when Macbeth was written. And then I just want to go a hair more into the Shakespeare. And so double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, cauldron bubble, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. So they're concocting this like strange, bizarre brew with gruesome ingredients like the fillet of a fenny snake, the eye of newt and toe of frog and wool of bat and tongue of dog and adder's fork and blind worm's sting, lizard's leg, and owlet's wing. I just love
Shakespeare.
Oh my God. You know what? I took Shakespeare my senior year of college. It was an 8 a.m. class, which you would think, what are you, insane, taking an 8 a.m. class in senior year of college? It's supposed to be like sleep in, chill. I just was fascinated with the language of it. And most people couldn't read in Shakespeare's time. So things had to be seen and shown for audiences to enjoy. And I just loved the language because reading Shakespeare really stinks, but hearing Shakespeare is amazing.
That's why they always made you read it out loud in English class in high school.
Yes, because it's not the same. Like, you don't understand Shakespeare that well when you're just straight reading it. Like, you need to hear the language because sometimes he uses like unique choices of consonants to make it all flow together into something that actually is a word. Because most of the time, some of it he's like cutting out lots of different letters. Anyway, sorry, that's just the Shakespearean part of me.
No, I love that. And I love that it's, that really, I feel like that's really where like the birth of the cauldron witch connection really kind of like cemented was in that era with Shakespeare. And ever 100%. Since then, it's that they've been toil and troubling their way through history.
So do you want to take us to, what's actually kind of cool is I just am noticing this now. Another connection to Shakespeare is the skull. And
Macbeth,
Hamlet especially.
Oh, Hamlet
and Macbeth.
And Macbeth, yeah. There's a lot of skulls. Shakespeare.
Well, dude was obsessed.
He would have gotten along well with the evil queen.
Maybe.
She could have supplied the skulls for his stories.
He probably would have made fun of her, and everybody would have loved it. Because he was known for writing really awful anti-establishment language and jokes. But because it was acted out in a play, it was seen as okay.
Right. I did find a better picture of that Griffin.
Oh, man. There he is, Peter Griffin.
So into scene 6, which is the haunted forest scene. The description for the scene is, as guests follow the route that Snow White took through the first route that Snow White took through that first, they encounter frightening creatures which seem to be under the witch's spell. The witch is seen again in a boat with the basket of poisoned apples. As the travelers near the cottage's entrance, the forest seems to lose much of its ominous appearance. The set description for this is the scene changes from stone block walls to gnarled trees laden with moss, a swamp-like area, which is very interesting. Scenic painting on the floor simulates muddy water and debris, which, Kirk, if you remember, way back when we did Haunted Mansion studying, and you remember all those Mark Davis concepts of the Haunted Mansion, like it was sinking into the swamp?
Yeah.
And it was all I'm like, I wonder how much of that they pulled out of the Imagineering kind of like drawer, right? The morgue there, as they call it in Imagineering, and recycled some of those ideas of being in a swamp. Because she did kind of run through like gnarled trees and stuff, but did she run through a swamp in proper? Like there was gators that she thought was gators, but they weren't gators.
Yeah, I would consider that it was the logs that turned into gators that were sunken. So yeah, that is definitely a swamp.
But it's interesting that like the description of that is so close to what they almost had in the Haunted Mansion in the graveyard scene. And obviously,
but don't you? We made parallels. We've always made parallels between the trees in Haunted Mansion and the trees in Snow White.
Right, and Claude Coates worked on both of them, so it makes sense that they would be similar that way. But yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking out loud. But they do have the props that we see in here, besides the trees, which we can talk about for sure. There is, they do have those gators show up, but they actually really do look a lot like gators. And they have red mouths, and they're snapping alligators.
Reminds me of home.
I think it says snapping crocodile logs on this one, so I don't know. Do you know?
Never mind.
Are they crocodile? Are they gators? Can you tell me? I don't know. You're the expert.
They have more narrow snouts, so I would lean towards crocodiles, but in bayous and swamps, it's more likely that they're gators. But those look like crocs because long, thin snouts are more crocodilian. Also, crocs, really, really mean. Not so nice. Alligators, swamp puppies. They're angels.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Safe. Yeah.
They also have some flying bats in the scene, which I was not able to find any pictures of the bats. I don't know if you were, but they did say they had them. And some of these trees, they're crazy looking. Like, what is this? They're like melted trees.
Yeah, I don't know what is going on.
I don't know.
The painting. The painting of them makes them have this like weird, almost like sheen to them, which makes them almost look waxy in a way.
Like they're like
a brown,
melted
dark brown,
crayons.
Waxy. Right. What did you say?
Melted crayons.
Crayons?
Like melted crayons for their like texture.
Crayons?
What? What's
crayons?
That? Crayons.
Crayons.
East Coast meets West Coast. Yeah.
Oh my Lord.
Crayons.
I had a buddy who, when I grew up, he used to call them crowns. Yeah, crowns.
No, that's a straight up wrong. So I know that I'm mentioning the trees, but we should probably back up because we missed one of the scariest parts of this attraction. What truly made Snow White Scary Adventures terrifying was the jump scares, and none was more terrifying than the jump scare of the witch in the boat. She's just there. She's here. She has her little green basket of apples, and she has a red apple in her hand. But the thing is, she would move. The boat would move out towards you just as you came around the corner from this dark tunnel that you could not see at all. So she just came out of nowhere because you're not expecting the witch to just pop out on a boat and come towards you. So she was terrifying. I remember that this was the one where I was like, I can't do this alone ever again. That's when this happened.
Well, dude, that would scare me too, because I would never eat a Red Delicious. Granny Smith's, I'm down, but I'm not eating that red apple. That thing is gross.
I'm with you on that. I like Granny Smith better.
I like how sharp and tart they are. It's always delicious.
Well, her makeup is the epitome of the 80s. Like, not gonna lie.
Oh,
it's like
God,
bright teal all the way up.
Mascara, dude. She's killing it.
She's hot.
Whoa. All right. Okay. Get a dungeon, you two.
I didn't mean it that way.
I don't know what way you bet.
So they had a problem here with the. I don't know if it was just in this area or if it was also in the cottage. Maybe somebody knows in here, but they had a problem where guests would steal the apples. So they were among the most frequently stolen items in Disneyland. And there's always a basket of apples that they kept close by backstage to replace the one that guests would snatch. And so, of course, I found one that had been auctioned off, and it has a little gold sheen to it, which is kind of neat.
So like people were stealing the red apple. They'd have to, right? Nobody's stealing the green ones.
No, they would snatch the red apple. And I think that then they figured out a way to change it, so they replaced it with an image of an apple projected by means of a parabolic mirror instead, so guests would stop stealing them. But that happened for years and years and years. People would just steal the apple and take it home as a souvenir. And they were plastic, according to Jim. Thank you for that. And they kept a basket full of them in the maintenance area, which is what I've heard as well. So they just...
How many of them do you think they would go through in a given week, month? I don't know what kind of frequency apples get stolen.
Often. I mean, I imagine daily at least, if not more. And they just kept replacing them until they figured out that they were tired of doing that and it was costing them money, and then they replaced them with the effect. But the witch does say apples, fresh apples here, and pops out of this tunnel and is terrifying. But then around the corner, she comes again after we get past the trees. But I do want to mention that the trees, they're really worth paying attention to, especially because we will see them come back a little tiny bit in Snow White's Enchanted Wish when we cover that. So these trees are not completely gone. They're still kind of around.
I like his nose on yours.
Oh, yeah. It's a little like branch. Mm-hmm. But the ones that are in the Tokyo Disney version actually have like faces on them. These ones are really kind of nondescript, but they definitely have like claws that are reaching for you. And then we get to the cottage, which is yet another jump scare by our lovely witch. So she's there. And again, see that?
How'd she get inside?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yo, that sigh of like story annoyance is funny.
Well, and then you can see, I'm pretty sure that's where they use the projection of the apple, because see how it looks, it's glowing and it looks totally different. So that would be one. And she says, "Have a juicy apple," as you go by, which I think is funny. She just keeps trying to sell you on the apple. Come on, man, take the apple. Let's do it.
Well, why do you think everybody took them? They thought that they were legit, like you could take it.
Like, have an apple. She offered it to me first.
It's not illegal. She gave it to me.
Yeah. So this is just a painted flat cottage with a door that opened and she would pop out of it. And that's pretty much all I have for that scene, unless you have anything else.
No, I love that part.
Okay. So on to the cliff part of this, the cliff scene at the end. So the notes are, after the witch's attempt to lure the travelers to their destruction with a poisoned apple has failed, she tries a last-ditch effort by prying a boulder off of a cliff. As the dwarves struggle to stop her, guests are able to escape. So the set is scenic painting behind the witch, and dwarves simulate the skyline of a mountain cliff. And then they will use a strobe-like effect for her to fall down. I'll tell you what, this was terrifying too, because like this is the end of the ride, by the way. This is how we end with her. There's kind of this cartoonish shadow of her looking like she's falling. And she does scream at that point. And, this scene did get an upgrade too, because the earlier versions they had kind of rain painted onto the back set. But in that 2010 55th anniversary upgrade of Fantasyland, they added some projection mapping rain all along the dwarves as well.
Yeah, it looks great.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything specific about the scene that you want to talk about?
I love it. I just love everything about it. Like, that is my everything. I want this back.
Wait, here, you get that one. I'll get this one.
She looks so good. Amazing.
She's something. So
I remember because like it's so dramatic of transition at this period, right? So like up until this point, you've been, once we get to like the dungeon, right? Dungeon, cauldron, boat, scary trees. She's popping out of the cottage. Now we get to see some friendly faces with the dwarves again, but there she is at the top trying to push a rock on our heads. Like, there isn't really a reprieve minus seeing the dwarves, but the dwarves look so scared.
Terrified. I always thought she was trying to crush them with the rock until I realized the boulder, until I realized, she's trying to get us.
Oh, she's
because we're supposed to be Snow White.
Right.
Right. So, why was this the end? Was this the end? What happened here that made this the final scene? Because this doesn't makes sense in terms of the movie. The movie doesn't end at that scene where the boulder and she like dies. Like that's not the end of the movie, right?
Right.
So there was still not enough space even with the additional track. They wanted to add a scene at the end with the prince and Snow White and their, castle in the clouds and all of the things and the dwarves and everything, but they didn't have enough space. They had to settle instead for a giant storybook that just said Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they lived happily ever after, because that's all they had room for with all the stuff they were doing with the Pinocchio attraction next door. And so the interesting thing is that you would see this boulder that had was going to fall on you, and you may or may not have caught that the witch also kind of died, but I never did when I went through it that she also fell down. You just saw the boulder falling on you and or the dwarves, and then it would say, and they lived happily ever after. And you're like, what? And it was actually, I enjoyed it because it was so comically insane. But that's not how the ending goes, right?
Yeah, it's such a strange, juxtapose from, oh, I'm getting smashed and bludgeoned into, yeah, it's great. Because, remember, think about the color and lighting, right? You're going from, pitch black, rain, thunder, giant rock, into flowers and love and clouds, and they were married. And you're like, what?
Right. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Which, again, they fix, but they still could have done better than the book.
Well, they do have
was the bad
a mural.
choice.
They do have this mural, but nobody sees it because it's to the right when you're unloading and you're looking to the left to get out.
What I'm saying is that should have been the spot. Do you know what I mean? They should have put that where the book is. Because this book makes you think, what just happened?
Right. So the mural nobody really caught because it was to the right side when you go to unload. And the only thing you did see was the raven that was sitting in the unload area and when it was looking at you as you got out.
I love that.
So always watching. So they did fix this when they did the Disneyland Paris version. They did actually add a scene at the end where I have a picture of it here, that they have the full scene with that. So they do have the Scary Adventures version there, but they do have a scene with the castle in the clouds and Snow White and her prince up on above before you exit, and it makes so much more sense. So they fixed it there, but they never fixed it in Disneyland until they changed it to Enchanted Wish. And it was always so bizarre because you just went through this really horrifying experience and then you all lived happily ever after. And that's that.
It makes zero sense.
Right. But one of my favorite features of the exit, though, is the gate. I don't have a great photo of it, but there is kind of like a sword through a heart that's on this beautiful ironwork that they did on this gate. And it's still there today. It's just, I don't know.
The sword in the heart is that's the box that the huntsman was
supposed
to bring back Snow White's heart in, and he put the deer one in there.
Yeah. So really fun little detail at the end there. To just highlight how much money they poured into this. They didn't spare any expense when it came to doing New Fantasyland. I think that they really wanted to make sure if they were going to take down something that Walt Disney created, whatever they put up was going to be worthy of being in Walt Disney's park for these original attractions that they had to remove. So I really love those kinds of details and that they have them all over the attractions in Fantasyland in 1983 Fantasyland, just as a way to honor, I think, the legacy of the original Fantasyland in a Disney park. I think that's all I have from this area. Do you have anything else from the end here?
No, because that's the end of this section of the attraction before we update it again.
Yeah. So I think that's where we're going to head next time, right? And we're going to head over to Snow White's Enchanted Wish. We'll just get out and we'll go back around and go forward in time a little bit to what they've changed. And I went on this about 7 times this past week just because I wanted to catch all the things. And there's an awful lot of things that we'll recognize from Snow White's Enchanted Wish that has been repurposed or moved or changed a little bit. And some of it you might not even have realized. So it'll be a really interesting episode to kind of go over how they've adjusted that storyline. And then we'll head over to Magic Kingdom because we got to talk about that version because it's really different.
It's better. It's so much scarier in the best way possible.
Interesting. And it's interesting because I was looking at the Tokyo version. It really is a blend of Magic Kingdom and Disneyland. It's kind of like they merged the two. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this episode of Distory. We hope you enjoyed Snow White's scary adventures, and hopefully we're not too terrified by the jump scares here, but learned a little bit along the way. Kirk, do you have any final thoughts here as we wrap up?
Crocodile logs have narrow snouts.
And old women, you should be nice to them. Always.
Or they'll eat you in their chicken-legged hut.
Cautionary tales for all of us. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being with us, and we'll see you next time for Distory.